All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and kick this off. In the chat, would love for you to put your name, your district, or your organization, and your favorite start of the year activity to do with your students. And while you're doing that, Katie, would love to hear from you.
Hi, I'm Katie. I work with Education Elements. I'm based out of DC. My favorite thing to do with students was this, not that protocol. I don't know if you've ever played that game of like you had to pick between this or the other thing. And it was just helpful. You find out a lot of like small information about your kids, and I love to hear about just like the things that they like, the things that they hate. It makes it easier to make jokes about it or reference it later on in the year. It was always a fun thing to see what people are bringing.
Love
Jason,
that.
what was yours?
I'm Jason Broussard. I live in Dallas, Texas, and part of the Education Elements team. And if you know me, you know that I am a big softie. I love any cheesy moment. And I've been known to cry a time or two. So I really love the write a letter to yourself on the very last day of school and putting them in a drawer, saving them, and then getting them out and giving them back to students and kind of just seeing their faces kind of light up to see where they thought they were going to be, where they landed, and it just brings me all the feels. So we're going to continue to talk about kind of what it's like to set up with success right from the start, especially as you think about personalizing the experience for your students. And our emails are there, and so feel free to reach out after. Let us know what you're thinking about, what you're taking away from this, how you're going to apply it. We're excited to keep in touch and hear from you. For those of you who are joining us, maybe it's because you've read a blog or you've gotten an email from us but aren't quite sure what we do, who we are, and how we talk about personalized learning. Want to just do a quick overview of what that is. Coming out of the pandemic, like many educators across the country, we really took a step back and reevaluated how we talked about personalized learning, what we wanted to be true for students in their learning experience, and also the supports that are there, not only for the students who matter most, but also for educators who are putting so much time and energy into creating a really safe space. And so we're really proud of the way that we um, have evolved and really started to think about the ways in which we think about the core four elements, the things that we know to be true when personalizing the experience, and also those nurturing learning environments that are so important to foster that. So when we think about student ownership, that's really the goal. And then we have the core four focus areas that support that: reflection and goal setting, flexible path and pace, collaboration and creativity, and target and instruction. And while those things are still so important and really crucial, none of that matters if there's not a nurturing learning environment. And so really want to kind of break that down and talk a little bit about what we mean by that. When we think about nurturing learning environments, and thinking about that in the work, we know that that really is around having strong relationships, building self-awareness and social awareness that creates the conditions for really personalized learning to impact students so that they not only see themselves and see all of the strengths and all of the awesome things that they bring to the table, but they're also really clear about their areas of opportunity where they really need to lean in and consider growing and developing skills. We also know that nurturing learning environments are super important when we think about honoring students who they are and not always necessarily like who we want them to be, right? So really important aspect to this work that we are excited and really proud to begin to call out with more specificity and confidence. When we think about how to do this and how to actually make this possible, we definitely think about the core four, the four elements that I mentioned earlier, and how they are really interconnected in making this happen, that they build off of each other, that when you are thinking about building a flexible path and pace, you can't do that unless you are targeting instruction, right? And that targeting instruction isn't going to really do the impact and make the impact you want it to for students if students don't feel like they are safe in the learning environment, if they feel really a strong sense of belonging in the classroom community, right? And so really thinking about the relationship between the two is vital. Today, we're going to kind of break down and focus really more on the nurturing learning environment side of this, and thinking about how does space and environment impact personalized learning and those core 4 elements. How does relationships and really thinking about the ways in which we co-create norms and values with students help foster this experience that we know all of you are really working hard to create, to support those teachers who are creating, and to ensure that students feel safe.
So we're going to start by talking about space and environment. And the driving question here is how might we ensure physical space and materials are supportive of personalized instruction? Speaking of space and environment, something else that I get to do today is facilitate this webinar from my home. And my dog has been on good behavior all day until we logged on here. So if you hear little cries, I swear she's fine. And it's not a child, it's just my puppy trying to get in the room. So apologies in advance in case you have to hear about that. So back to space and environment that we set up in our classroom. What I'm going to share is from a book called The Space, who's by Dr. Robert Dillon. He created kind of a playbook for educators. And I love this quote of every time a human being comes into a space, they visually process the entire room. But sometimes by the time we actually ask students to intellectually engage, they're visually exhausted. So if you are like me, when you were setting up your classroom, the first thing I would think about is what are all the things I need in here? Like, what are all the things I need to put in this room to make it workable and livable for kids? And instead, he pushes in this book to think about what are some of the things that you might actually consider removing to make it more conducive to work, less visually overwhelming. And I love that question of what do you actually need? And the rule that he applies that I'll push to y'all today is to think about the same way that a lot of us think about our wardrobe. If you're like, I haven't worn this in X amount of months, it's got to go, to treat your classroom the same way. So if I haven't referenced this poster, if I haven't used these materials, why are they here? They're just taking up space. So while some things might be visually appealing, if they're not supportive of learning, the push here is to consider removing them to create a more calming environment for kids. If you're also like me and you love stuff, this will be really hard. So his suggestion is to start small. So it doesn't mean take everything out of your classroom, but instead to just become more aware of it. And when you notice that you're not using certain things, begin to remove them. So by no means am I telling you to empty out your classrooms, but just start to pay attention to what are you using and what is helpful. The next thing, also from the same book, is to consider classroom design. Talks a little bit about color and light. The idea here is to have a color theme. I'm not telling you have to become an interior designer, but in the sake of not visually overwhelming kids, kids actually really do notice when there is a coherence and calm within a space. And so the suggestion is to have 1 or 2 bright colors and then base colors. I pulled some color palettes for inspo if you're still looking, but pay attention so your classroom doesn't end up looking like a hodgepodge or a box of crayons, and instead try to, identify some core colors that you have already. So I love this point of you don't have to go out and buy all new materials that are fit within one color palette. You probably already naturally have one. So again, just paying attention. And then as you add things or subtract them, consider if they fall into the color scheme that you have here. The other thing that I really appreciated about this, the call out in it was an article that is tangential to the book, The Space, but they talk about your bulletin boards don't have to be a work of art and to lean into the all natural of the spaces that you have. So sometimes doing less is more, which I really appreciated. The other thing is to think about lighting. We all have experienced the really aggressive lighting that exists within schools. And so thinking about if you have the privilege of having nice windows, have them open so sunlight can come in. If not, consider adding a few lamps around to create a more calming presence other than that like really bold fluorescent light that none of us look flattered in, and also isn't great for students and learning when they're in that all day long. So just a few considerations for kind of the aesthetics and style within your classroom. But to this point, design is not just what it looks and feels like, it's also how it works. This is a Steve Jobs quote, who is has become the pinnacle of design, I would say, as he designed a lot of the things that we use on our daily basis. And so how are we thinking about the functionality of our room and not just how it looks and feels? A resource that Jason and I both love that I'm excited to bring to y'all is this idea from School Retool. And it's a big idea of defronting the classroom. And so in a traditional space, usually we have where the teacher sits, their desk, in a board. The idea is to think about not having a front of your classroom. So there's some little diagrams here of what this could look like. There's different options for people to sit around the room, so some flexible seating. And there is no front space where everyone is oriented to. So there's a few ideas for how to get started. Again, these things don't happen overnight. I'm not saying that you should go in and take down the whiteboard or move your smart board around your room. I know that those things still exist. So you might consider moving your teacher's desk or removing it altogether. So moving it so it's not in the front of the room, but maybe to the side. Select or create seating options that are flexible and movable. So if someone's at the front of the classroom one day, that doesn't mean that they will be there forever. You can move your furniture around to make it conducive to what you're teaching. And then this will be a theme throughout today, but ask your students, how would they like to design the classroom? I know not grade appropriate for all levels, but I feel like upper elementary, middle, and high school could all have some input in the way the classroom is designed. And then this idea of movable, writable spaces. How can you create spaces where not just the teacher is using the whiteboard or the whiteboard's in the front, but how can you use movable spaces where kids can process their thinking out loud? So think about movable whiteboards, wall space, clipboards, etc. So there's more flexibility in where that writing lives. The last thing I'll share here is thinking about the types of spaces to consider in your classroom. Think about, are there quiet spaces for kids to work independently? Are there collaborative spaces, creative spaces, and writable spaces? You might be thinking, what's the difference between collaborative and creative? Collaborative is simply a place where kids can talk to each other. Creative spaces, think spaces that can get a little messy and disorganized that won't disrupt the rest of your class. And I talked a lot, I just referenced writable spaces. Again, these are spaces where kids have the opportunity to process their own thinking as they write out and post up. All right, I'm going to give the mic to Jason to talk about relationship building at the start of the year.
Yeah, so really thinking about how to build these authentic bonds. And when we think about relationships and really building this, one thing that we know we want to focus on is really thinking about what this actually means. How do we build these authentic relationships? A quote for us that we really are inspired by, the incredible Rita Pearson, who had that incredible TED Talk where she kind of drops the mic saying kids can't learn from teachers they don't like. And our team really believes that the follow-up to that quote is that teachers can't personalize for students they don't know. And that's a big part of the job. And oftentimes I think probably a misconception. We get so caught up in the targeted instruction of it all, right? The small grouping and making sure our classroom is set up how we think it needs to be set up. And we could lose sight of, I know I oftentimes had to take a step back and to make sure that I was making space to really learn and hear from students. So a few things that we wanted to share that could be done, but we'll love, as I'm kind of going over this, to see in the chat how you all leverage checking in with students. What are the ways that you check in with students to learn a little bit more about how they're feeling and what they're interested in? One thing we know to be true is that time is really important and you don't have a lot of it. And so we want to just recognize that as we share this strategy, that balancing this space to create to ensure that there's space for students to check in while keeping track of the learning targets and the objectives that you're working towards, it is something that is important. So we definitely recommend quick and easy questions that can be answered from students. The goal, though, is that those questions are going to inform the course that you're going to take, whether that's that plan you've prepared or any adjustments that might need to be taken in order to meet your students' needs. To do this quickly, oftentimes you might consider leveraging a number system where students are holding up a number that represents something specific. You could use four corners if that was something that was helpful for you and your students, depending on age and all of those things. But the main point here is that you're doing something quickly, you're doing it consistently, so it becomes a routine, it becomes a part of the procedures in your classroom, and most importantly, it is informative. Check-in should definitely engage students right from the start, right? Have them jumping into conversation and into the classroom community as soon as that question is posed. Hopefully those questions are also helping increase the sense of belonging and really deepening connections, not just between you and students, but also students and students, right? Check-ins shouldn't require students to share information they're not comfortable with sharing. And so really intentionally thinking about crafting those questions to do so. And it should maximize the instructional time and goals for the class period. So I know, if you all were flies on the wall when I first tried this out, and I'll talk a little bit about how I did that when I was in the classroom here in a second, you know, 15 minutes into the check-in is like, no, this is not how we can do this. So really thinking about how can I do it quickly, but also leverage it to help maybe set up what we're going to talk about that day. Two strategies I wanted to share from my classroom. One was the daily check-in. So I had this poster hung up in my classroom, and underneath this poster, it said, "Are you a 1 to 5 or 2 thumbs up?" And so when the class got started, we'd go over our learning targets for that day, and I would simply ask, "Let's check in. Everyone on a scale of 1 to 5 or 2 thumbs up, how are you feeling right in this moment?" So 1 was, and I can't, all the way up to I literally can't even. And then also you had folks who were checking in with 2 thumbs up. And then the spiel would go, if you are 2 thumbs up, that's awesome. Keep that energy up and recognize that not everyone might be 2 thumbs up today. So really help support your friends around you. If you are a 1 through a 5, make sure that you are really being mindful of how that might be impacting you and the way you're interacting with folks. And if you need to step out at any time, let me know and we can find a time during class that makes sense to just connect. And so just really quick, I got to see around the room, if for whatever reason there were a lot of 3s, 4s, 5s, that definitely made me kind of consider, do we need to take a step back and have a community circle? If I saw Katie checking in as a 5, and Katie and I have had a little bit of tension over the past couple class periods, that just signaled to me, all right, I'm going to be really mindful of how I'm going to adjust my interactions with Katie. So I'm not just adding to this, right? And so it was just a really helpful way to daily assess where kids were. And then one of my favorite things to do in the classroom was a weekly check-in. We did it every Friday, GAAC. So it was really around growing, appreciating, apologizing, celebrating, and connecting. So you see the questions there. I'd have students kind of think before we got into a circle, writing down their responses to all of those. Maybe sometimes, especially 11th graders, they don't always have people they need to apologize for. I get that, but still gave them space to think through all of those questions. We'd circle up as a class community, and then I would just ask that they share one of their responses and let them choose that. We'd go in a circle and share it out. So a great way to do that. Did they kind of give silly answers in the beginning or like feel like this was a waste of time? Absolutely. Did I consistently do it? And over time, they really bought into it and it became safer and safer each time? 100%. Another helpful way to kind of frame that thinking of how to inform is this statement here. So again, the more comfortable we get as educators using these, I think the easier this processing is helpful, but it might take a little bit, right? But because I heard blank, we're going to add, change, remove blank. What's super important about this, and Katie was really pushing my thinking here and reminding me of how important this is saying it out loud, right? Don't just hold it in your head, but really name it for students. I hear you. This is what I'm hearing from you. And this is how I'm going to adjust, right? So a lot of times we're really good at asking students questions for feedback, but it doesn't matter if we're not showing them that we're listening, right? If we're not making sure that they can make the connections for how what they shared impacted this experience. Awesome. All right, Katie, I'm going to pass it to you. I'm going to check out these check-ins here.
Yeah, we have a lot of good ideas in the chat. Post-it notes, electronic forms. We love a good Netflix character check-in. Kids love the relevancy. Thumbs up, wrist, thumbs down. Deborah with a daily community circle. I love the idea. I recently went to a training where we talked about the power of having people sit together without something in the middle. So like not having students sit around a desk, even adults, not having a physical barrier between you can go a long way. And so that made me think about that community circle idea. Oh, I love the stack solo cups. So you can see, that's a really helpful visual. Yeah. Superheroes and heroines. Yeah. So thank y'all for sharing your ideas. Again, there's not one right way to check in with students or build relationships with them. But again, I feel like sometimes, and we hear this, we work with a lot of districts, a lot of schools, a lot of teachers, and some things that we hear pretty often are like, oh, well, I have to get to the content. And so I feel like it's really helpful to just reorient ourselves of that idea from Rhea Pearson that the relationships come first. And I feel like if you do some of that work up front, it goes a really long way in terms of kids wanting to learn content from you. So appreciate you guys sharing the way that you've approached this in the past. The last thing that we're going to talk about are some of the norms and values. So how might we develop shared norms and values as a classroom community? I'm going to pause and give you all a moment to read this quote from one of my faves, Dr. Linda Darling Hammond, around the essential needs of belonging. So this quote for me makes me think about both the types of classrooms we set up and the way that we bring ourselves into a space. And the fact that children are so perceptive to the type of environment and space that they are in. And when they feel like they belong in a space, again, they're ready to learn and engage and bring their full selves. And when they don't, they alienate, they marginalize, they step back. And so part of this conversation is going to be around one way. An additional way to do that is to build your classroom community with your kids instead of for them or at them, or if they feel like they're walking into a space that's already been curated and they're just there. They're not a part of it, they're just living within it. And so one way to do that is to create your norms and values together. A way that I used to, I wish I put my cute little face like Jason did, but the way that I used to do this in my own classroom was to brainstorm, have kids talk about what does your ideal learning community look and sound like? And you might hear things like it's fun, it's collaborative, it's creative, we get to make stuff, we have a good time, but then get specific. What does it mean to be collaborative? How does that look and feel? And then revisit these often. So I feel like the kind of leg up it gives you to have kids define this is that when they are not adhering to the norms that they set for themselves, it's not like, well, I said XYZ and you're not doing it. It's more of like you said and we said that collaboration was important to us. And what that means is that we treat each other with kindness and respect and we listen. And I'm not seeing you adhere to the norm that we set as a team. And so it feels different for kids to feel like this is a rule that you didn't follow. Versus this is a standard we set for ourselves. I also feel like in this, in the way that we've been talking about this, is you probably came to this webinar, I'm like, man, I thought we were going to talk about personalizing learning. The next point and kind of the final point that I want to transition to is you can set up all of your classroom norms and values, but if you don't give students the opportunity to practice them, it will all kind of feel inauthentic and phony. So if at the beginning of the year, kids say they want a space that's fun, that's collaborative, and then all of their work is independent and silent, it will feel like we just did that for what reason? So I feel like the main takeaway here is there's some structures that need to be set up around nurturing learning environments to start. And then really the core four: reflection, goal setting, targeted instruction, collaboration, creativity, flexible path and pace, all reinforce what you've already set up. So as you think about creating your classroom or adjusting some small things within there, know that trying out the core four isn't always going to go super smoothly at first. So, for example, kids say they care about collaboration. You give them an at bat for collaboration. Please don't expect that they're going to get it right on the first try. But because you've set norms, it gives you that opportunity to come back and try again and say, like, actually, this is what we said about what this should look like, and this is what happened. So let's try again later this week, tomorrow. The same thing for providing flexibility. You guys said you wanted to have fun and to have choice. We're going to try it. It probably won't go great on the first time. But again, you'll have the opportunity to come back, reinforce the things that you want to see, and give it another go. So would love to hear, how do you reinforce the classroom values and norms through your instructional practices? So this is a two-part reflective question. So what are the things that you value within your classroom, and then how do you reinforce it through the instructional practices that you employ? So if you're a teacher, the question remains as is. If you're a leader, I'm curious to see how your teachers in your building approach this.
And it's funny, I'm actually on an internal retreat today, and our team is working on this very thing, creating norms that we want to kind of commit to, things that we value. And it's just such an important life skill, a skill that students definitely, by doing this, have the opportunity to build as they prepare to do awesome things in post-secondary. So really love all the ideas that you're sharing here.
I did want to thank you all for taking the time to reflect on the ways you already do this. Something that I'm thinking about leaving this webinar is that power of community. And I feel like sometimes as we start the school year, there's some really good habits that we each have. And I do encourage you, whether they're ideas from here that you're taking or your own ideas that you've been doing amazing with, to make sure you share them with at least one or two colleagues if they're going well. There is some power in this like grassroots sharing of information from classroom to classroom. So if something's going really well for you, I do encourage you to share the wealth of knowledge with your fellow teachers and colleagues. It doesn't have to be something Jason or I shared. You all have your own beautiful ideas that you've been sharing with us today. Again, I did want to just say thank you for your time today.
Thanks, everyone.